Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us again on yet another When Movies Were Good. My name's Rachel here in Melbourne, Australia, with my great friend and special guest star co-host, Matt. Matt, how are you doing over at your place today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Working on all my isolation hobbies.
Yeah, I know. We're still here. Don't know where everyone is that's listening to this is based around the world. We're still in a really hard lockdown here, at least until maybe next week. So we'll see what happens.
Look, who
Unfortunately,
knows? I just take the punches as they come.
well, we have to do that now, but as we always apologise while we do the show, this route that the audio probably cuts in and out because of the Wi-Fi, the stress on the Wi-Fi from everyone using it. So apologies to that. We do look forward to when we can record in person together because it just sounds so much better. So Matt, we are doing a double this week. We're doing a Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers double. We're doing Follow the 1930 and Shall We Dance 1937, both from RKO, the company studio that made them, and both directed by Mark Sandrich, who was a big sort of very well-known director whose life was very tragically cut short. He only died when he was 44 from a heart attack. So that's why I was wondering, I hadn't heard of Mark Sandrich, the director of both of these films, a bit more, but it's because he did a lot of work, came up as a tradesman, was in the silent, made these films in the 30s and was doing really well, and then sort of unfortunately passed away very suddenly I mean, 44 is a bit younger now than it was back then, but still not old. So, so that was a bit sad to sort of hear that. So we're doing these two films. Actually, Matt, these were your suggestions. Had you ever seen these films before, or you just owned them for a while, or?
No, I've seen the films quite a few times, and particularly Shall We Dance. That, if any, is the movie that is responsible for really getting me into the classics. I love it. I've seen it so many times. I think the music is really catchy. I love Gershwin's music, but also so many of I find every era of films has a distinguishing characteristic that I keep coming back to it for. And in the 30s, it's that really great witty dialogue. So it's not like a lot of the dialogue you'd see in a drama by someone like Tarantino, where it's like a lot of subtext, or even back in the time with films like Robin Hood, where it's a much more one-dimensional hero type dialogue. But just particularly in a lot of these comedic dance films, I just love all the bits of wit. Like I smiled to myself so much in that beginning line of "Shall We Dance" when a bellboy makes an excuse in French for drawing on the company owner's portrait, and he just asks this stuffy man just asks the other guard, "What did he say?" And he just says, "It means the same thing in French, monsieur."
Yeah, and also there's a lot of sort of sidelines and side eye and sort of little quips and a few double entendres, and I mean it's all very cute. It's all these films are very easy to watch as well. They're just, you put them on, you sit back, you enjoy them. I especially like, being a big music lover myself, I like any film that have music in it. Especially the ones that just get out there and do it and that aren't pretentious. And then you had two of the most famous musical writers of like back then what were considered modern sort of pop songs, which was in Berlin and the Gershwin brothers. So, I mean, you can't really get any better than that. So we'll start with the film Follow the Fleet. So this one was, as we had mentioned, they both came out from RKO. Ginger and Fred had gone over to RKO when Ginger had a couple of contracts, I think, at Paramount and at Pathé, and then she came over to RKO, and her background was actually in musical theatre. In fact, I believe that's where she first met Fred Astaire back in Broadway. So Follow the Fleet was written by Alan Scott and Dwight Taylor, and of course stars Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, and I didn't realise that was Randolph Scott. I was like, who played Bilge in this film? I was like, hang on, where do I know this guy before? Oh my God, it is actually Randolph Scott. So it was really nice to see him in this film because he became quite well known for his Western work in the 40s and 50s.
It's quite fascinating the different cameos you can see come up, and like this one has some others like of Lucille Ball as well, and I spent ages trying to work out who she was, and I had to like eventually cheat and look up online, and it was only this very tiny part she made in Follow the Fleet, and
it's I looking for I missed it.
Yeah, I believe she's the one that gave Ginger's sister a makeover.
Okay, and then Betty Grable who was a massive pin-up in the war era. She was in this film as well.
Yeah, so it was a little bit hard to find some of the where these cameos showed up, because when you're looking, you're biased in sort of the stereotypical image. Like I kept looking for the I Love Lucy Lucille Ball, and I realized, oh wait, there was actually a time in history when she was young, but I found her, and I believe Betty Grable was one of the group singers at Ginger's club.
So we'll just remind the audience or inform the audience that haven't seen the film. So Bake and Bilge have just docked in San Francisco. So it's they're technically in the Navy. I didn't know there was so much singing and dancing in the Navy. If there is Matt, I should sign up for it. But Bake wants to get back together with Sherry, who's played by Ginger Rogers, and then Bilge meets Sherry's sister Connie, and he has romance in his mind too, and there's lots of hijinks and things that go on, plenty of fantastic dance numbers, especially in their Navy uniforms. So it's just such a feel-good film. So what did you think of this particular film of Gingers?
Well, one of the favorite parts, perhaps naturally, is their most iconic scene towards the end of the Let's Face the Music and Dance part. And the film as a whole, looking at both films as a whole, I probably lean more towards Shall We Dance, because it has a lot more of my favorite numbers. But the Let's Face the Music and Dance, that really makes the film. I love the bits with the little monkey coming about. The little monkey in a sailor suit, that was so funny. I think the plot is probably a little more extended than it had to be. I think they probably forgot that, okay, you're effectively doing a storyline plus the musical numbers, so you probably need to have a story that can be compacted a little more. But I think it's a great, especially if you may have a younger person who's not used to black and white films, it's a great one to get them started on. What I feel bad for, though, is like, obviously they're fictional sailors, but I'm just thinking from this period made about 5 years before World War II, and I'm thinking, well, you boys don't know what you're in for.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's it probably, I found both films maybe a little long for what they needed to be, but it doesn't matter, because
even Shall We Dance?
Probably found Shall We Dance a little bit long as well, but you know me, I'm big into 90-minute films, and especially it's probably something that also turned me off modern films. I just find them all 3-hour films it's just not that these films are, but so I probably preferred, this was the 5th film that they had made together, and they made these films in a very short time. Now, both of them came from such a pedigree of singing and dancing. It's interesting, you actually sort of told me this about Fred initially, that he was such a stickler for rehearsals and rehearsing everything a million times, to the point where he did drive some of his female co-stars and fellow dancers insane, because he, was just such a stickler for rehearsals and everything, whereas Ginger was one of the few, if not the only woman that worked with him, as he said years later in interviews, that could tolerate what he dished out. Like, the other girls would run off and cry and stuff, and eventually they get it and it was fine, but she would just keep on going. And he said it wasn't necessarily because she was the best dancer, but she was most intuitive, and she was a good actress, because she actually went on and had quite a career after this musical phase, and she worked right up until old age, really. She's on the Love Boat and stuff in the 70s. So
and in her older life, she was quite a vocal presence for a lot of conservation efforts in a lot of films, because a lot of people probably don't know this, but most films made, especially up until the early 50s, were made from silver nitrate base, which is often quite flammable and prone to acid burn, etc. And so at this critical point in the 70s and late 80s, Ginger was quite a vocal presence for conservation efforts, which we take for granted now in a lot of museums and motion picture archives.
She did seem like an activist, and she was. I mean, I don't know whether her being an only child. I think both her and I didn't actually realise that Fred Astaire sort of had stage managing parents as well, because he had been training as a dancer since he was 4 or 5 with his sister Adele. And I think that the family packed up and moved from the Midwest to New York or the area around there to start the kids in performing for vaudeville stuff. I didn't actually realise that about him. So
yeah, well, there are certain people like Fred Astaire and Buster Keaton where they just had it bred into them from when they could walk, and it worked. And you're glad it happened for them. Like, you hear of a lot of people that do acting classes when young and stuff, and it doesn't work out so well. But lucky for him. But I think sort of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think also that a lot of that. He is like we've gotten so used to dancing being a very erotic format, whereas Fred was more about it being, not that he was thinking of it in a ballet sense, but he was focused on it being as a almost like an acrobatic craft, and perhaps because he spent so much of his early years play acting the role of a couple, even though his sister was the dancer in his early career. I think there's a quote of a producer with one of his first non-related co-stars, and he's like, "Put it a bit together more. She's not your sister," or something like that.
That sounds familiar. I'm sure I think I read something about that, but I suppose that's why. And he even did say in interviews as he got older, even after he had sort of officially retired from performing as such, he said always commented that she was by far the most suitable partner for him, because she could pretty much handle what he dished out. So yeah, look, I would probably say I like this film a little bit more than Shall We Dance. Not that I probably prefer the music in Shall We Dance more, but I think the actual storyline in Follow the Fleet, I think I preferred that a bit more, and I like the naval setting and all that sort of stuff. And I actually really liked seeing Randolph in this film, and definitely want to make more of an exploration into especially his Western era of films. But he was a very long performed and long-lived actor himself, even though he's sort of performing he wasn't Ray Milland or anything. He was performing well into the 80s, but he definitely had quite a long career, and he was a sensible man with his investments and stuff. And I also read an interesting thing about him and Cary Grant that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
But not to get too far away from discussing the film, but I sort of saw photos of them together when they lived together as friends, and I was like, wow, I'd heard about a few of the other sort of romances that had gone on with some of the leading men in Hollywood, especially being, an Anthony Perkins and Rock Hudson fan. But I actually didn't know about that at all. And then when you see the photos of them together, you're like, wow, how could and then apparently the studio really closed that down quite fast. But this was a fun role for him in this film, and I do.
Yeah.
A lot of these songs we actually had in this film, Let's Face the Music and Dance, for example, they were actually like in our top 40, I guess you'd call it now, but in the hit parade, as they called it back then, they were actually all very successful songs. So I think I actually enjoy the music in this film. Actually, the music in both films are written by one of the greatest composers ever to have lived. So,
the music and film industry and theatre could often be quite close at the time. Like, it's I collect 78 gramophone records, and so many of my collection have this music title from this movie and that movie. And so part of it was obviously a marketing ploy, but I think most movie theater and music people were kind of aware that they were sharing in the same pie, and they knew, and they at least had an idea of how to sometimes match the flavors, shall we put it.
So if we go on to the second film that really was made literally, I mean, Fred was kind of pumping out the films at this point. I think that's what put a lot of people under stress because they were constantly making films. So Shall We Dance came out in 1937. From what I read, Flight of the Fleet was a bigger box office success than Shall We Dance. Not that Shall We Dance failed or anything, but I also was reading that it sort of the audience was like, yeah, how many Fred and Ginger movies are we going to see type thing, and they were kind of shifting their focus onto other pairings and other sort of stars that were coming up at that time. So it sort of was the last. They did make other films together when they were years later, but this at this period, I think this was one of the last films. Is that right? Is this one of the last films they made this period?
One of them, because like part of it, it's not the film's fault. It's just that when it happened to appear in the chronology of their partnership, and like that's how the studio system worked. And still now, where you find something that works and you write it out as long as it will go. And I think it's unfortunate because like you can sort of tell a lot about how film is thought of in the popular consciousness by looking at Wikipedia entries, and because like it kind of relies on the interested members of the public to write it, and that film seems to be thought of purely in terms of where it stood in the economic stance in the trajectory of Fred and Ginger's films. But I think it's really should be regarded as one of the best pieces of 1930s film. It's it has like you were saying that you weren't as keen on the plot yourself. Personally, I liked it, and I liked a lot of the witty lines, and you had so many good back characters. Like you have Fred's manager and the hotel manager Cecil Flintridge. So I think a lot of the so probably it's and I guess maybe that's how their script writing worked in that series. They'd sort of have different audiences that they tapped into.
Yeah, so this one for our audience is in this one Fred's playing a ballet dancer, Petrov, and there's a showgirl who he sort of becomes involved with as such, Linda, who's played by Jim doing this one, and fake a marriage of convenience, or rather people around them do. And then, of course, in the typical fashion, they end up falling in love. And I love how these films end with them sort of looking at the camera and sort of winking.
Except they didn't plan to be in the fake marriage of convenience.
Yes, that's true. That's actually true. That was planned without their sort of knowledge. But I actually love all that sort of stuff about, the different sort of plot lines of people being forced into something they didn't realise they were forced into, and then it all works out. It all worked out at the end.
Yeah.
So,
it's a sort of plot farsa that a generation earlier would have been used in Gilbert and Sullivan type productions.
Yes. Actually, my favourite Gilbert and Sullivan is Patience. Have you ever seen that one? And that one's a little bit like, I can see what you say about that. And Gilbert and Sullivan's definitely important, especially if you watch Gilbert and Sullivan now.
Yeah.
But, it did actually remind me a little.
Well, I think Gilbert and Sullivan probably used a lot of the plot twists of like babies swapped at birth and stuff that you see in a lot of the Shakespeare dramas, but put them in a setting that made them a lot more comical.
Yes. I don't actually, come to think of it, I don't mind a good old Gilbert and Sullivan, because I really love the singers like singing their butts off on stage. It's fantastic. So this one was
of the sea.
Yeah, I remember when I was living in London, I dragged someone to go and see a Gilbert and Sullivan show with me at the Savoy, of all places. And they were like sitting there going, what is this show? Like, what the hell? And I'm like, it's Gilbert and Sullivan. That's just what it is. It's ridiculous. And they just kind of never copped on to the concept. But you can only, with a lot of these films and these particular niches in these genres, you really, if you have an appreciation and study a little bit about it, you just will enjoy it so much more. It's like when you've actually studied, say, you brought up Shakespeare, when you actually study a Shakespeare piece and understand it, and then you go and watch the play, it's just so much more enjoyable because you know what's happening, you know. So you know the tropes that are being used, and you know, turn of phrase and everything. You understand it, so it makes it so much more enjoyable. So this one again was directed by Mark Sandridge. And written by Alan Scott and Ernest Gino or Pajana. I'm not sure if I'm saying that one right. Yes, this one. So the first film was Irving Berlin and Max Steiner, and this one was the Gershwin brothers, who had been involved in actually. Fred was quite involved with because he worked with them on Broadway for several years, because that's where he initially. From my notes here, he initially had met Ginger when he was helping with the choreography on a play called Girl Crazy, and I think he was involved in that one, and that's where he knew her from initially. So when she kind of eventually came out to Hollywood, he was already familiar with her. So if my research was right, if I didn't misread that, so. You can't take that away from me. It's one of the greatest songs of all time. And Fred,
I love that.
It's just, and it's used in. When I was researching this, I kind of went off Steve Martin years ago. I don't know why. I know he's more into banjo playing and stuff now, which is great. But he did. He said you see more his banjo and playing his banjo than doing any acting, which is fine, which he's probably just fed up with Hollywood anyway, which a lot of older actors are. But he did a film with Bernadette Peters, who was a well-known Broadway actress, called Pennies from Heaven. And a lot of those musical numbers apparently are in this film, or they're paid homage to in this film. And that film came out in the early 80s. I'd actually be interested to see that film, and I'm wondering if that's where I heard "You Can't Take That Away From Me." Oh, it must have been on an ad or something. But I know they use it in other films. I know that it's often a music cue in other films.
Maybe I was about to say I'd seen that film, but then I realized I was thinking of Three Coins and a Fountain. They need to be careful how many movies they make with currency in the name. What I do know is that actually Fred regretted that in that number they didn't use any dancing, because that's one of the few numbers in the film that doesn't have an active that's not actively done to dancing. And when they had a reunion picture in like 1949 or something, they actually did do do that song again, set to dance. But
Barclays play or something called something like that. That was like their
something like that. Yeah, well, it's the internet age. We don't need to remember things. People just need to know the year 1949, Fred and Ginger reunion, and they can find out themselves.
Yes, that's right. And now you say that, it makes sense, because they did, at the end of the film, they do bring that back as a musical cue. Do they? They bring "You Can't Take That Away From Me" back as a bit of a musical cue when they're doing one of the last dance numbers. But I'm not sure whether Gershwin was upset that they didn't use it more as a centerpiece for dance as well, or Fred was more upset about that. I thought it was
where they did use it was sort of as a kind of a love leitmotif in that scene in the last third, when they almost part ways because of they've gone to their separate hotel rooms, and they're outside. You can see outside both their windows, and they're playing it quietly because it's quite a catchy melody. And you're sort of that's when they're engineering that you hope that they think to go into each other's rooms. Whether that was part of that was probably to do with what you could or couldn't do with the censors at the time, but it was kind of a good. They used it as a tie-in theme.
I still think it was used quite effectively, and it's, you know, you can even sing that song to younger people and they'll be vaguely sort of familiar with it. So
Yeah, I just think it's got a really great melody. I love music from that period. It's it's probably the era that I listen to a lot the most.
yeah, I like all different eras of music, but I must say there was something about, you know, being a Liberace fan, you know, you're drawn to music from that era. That's when his TV shows sort of started in the 40s and all that sort of stuff, or more, maybe it was more 50s. I think it actually started in. But you know, he often would play a lot of. Yes, he would play his classical music, but he would also play a lot of like period music, like You Can't Take That Away From Me as well on his TV show, which was very popular. Yeah. So I've always listened to, you know, music from that era, and really I was listening to some Bing Crosby the other day, and a good old sing along with that, and I was like, I can't even believe I know these songs. But when you know, Matt and I are probably, especially Matt being a lot younger than me, are probably very old souls, so we have always gravitated to these sorts of older format music, and just, you know, especially with what's on the radio today. Although I don't mind a few songs that come out every now and then, you know, if I hear them. But I really actually liked Slap That Bass that he did. That was the one.
How great is that piece? So like I watched that in bed on YouTube a few times over. It's just such a great melody. I love that, and I love the setting to the big steams. I mean, also I'm a bit of a steam engine nerd, so it works in with that as well. But just they're tapping around with the big shadows from the machinery to time with the melody. It's such a great rhythm.
And it's you know, what's going on in society now, you actually forget that those black musicians and performers, what trailblazers they actually were. And there's a lot of issue stuff and how they were used in films, and I get it. We had discussed this in Gone with the Wind as well. But I think it's also nice to just separate that off for a bit and just enjoy them for the talent that they were and are, you know, and not bring all the political stuff into it.
In a way, it was honest, because they were acknowledging that if Fred was, because actually it's almost like a kind of a Titan, like the James Cameron Titanic type lead up, where she's going down to the sort of the real people down below deck, in the same way that you have that conflict just before that scene when the manager's trying to find him, and the best thing the steward can say is that, oh, maybe he's in someone else's stateroom. But no, they were honest that they knew that if they were going to show that sort of music, they had to go below deck.
Yes, yeah. It was one of my favourite sequences in the film, and it was just a joy to see them. So I think it's sometimes nice to get away from what's happening in modern society and actually appreciate these performers and what they actually had to endure to even be performers back then. And it was fantastic to see them in the film, and I'm just glad that they were in it because they were fantastic. So I think overall, if we're kind of wrapping up our thoughts on the film, I'll go first. I really liked the films. Yes, I probably think both of the films were slightly long, but I think a lot of films are slightly long, and as you get to know me, you'll probably realise that. It doesn't mean they're bad. I just probably would wrap them up a little bit quicker. But having said that, who cares? Because it's Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and it's the music of two of the greatest composers that, you know, ever lived. And they're fun, they're lighthearted. I love everyone in the films. Love seeing Randolph in Follow the Fleet. Probably would lean slightly more towards Follow the Fleet because I liked that story a little bit more, but still enjoyed both of them. Loved all the supporting actors. So thanks for introducing me to them, Matt. Thanks for sending me the films to watch them.
Oh, you're welcome. Particularly Shall We Dance. It always makes me smile when I see it.
No, they're great. They're just lovely. They're lovely films. So you probably preferred Shall We Dance over?
Yeah, I admit I probably could have. If you put the musical pieces into any plot line, I'd have probably preferred it anyway. And that's just how the mind works sometimes. But yeah, that's definitely one of my favorites. I did love the sort of Gilbert and Sullivan type plot farce. So it's quite funny in that way. But and like the whole Art Deco style with the opening credits on Gershwin's name and everything. To me, it's one of the best 30s films. I think that and King Kong are personally, I think are one of the top achievements of the Art Deco period.
Yeah, I definitely want to go through and have a look at some of the other top films of the 30s but as Matt and I often say to each other, we're going to be at this for the rest of our lives, which is a good thing because obviously we're going to be spending a lot of time indoors for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. I'd actually like for Shall We Dance to be like re-released with the with the digital restoration and fixing of the analog. And a bit of a side note, they're actually in a multi-decade long project at the moment to create like a rescoring of the of Gershwin's music for that film, because it's I think only been partially, it's not been properly done, and like it's going to take a couple of decades apparently to sort of get his comprehensive vision for it. I don't know why, but I look forward to when they can properly re-release all the sound.
Yeah, anything that helps to preserve what these amazing people did all those years ago, and it's that really they were, even just the way that the films put together the sound and music, you think how primitive the stuff that they had back then. And it's so much, I think we've gone too far the other way now, where there's so much computer work and digital work, and the whole thing looks so fake that you're like, I much prefer literal effects and literal sound effects, and yeah, they're a bit more quaint or whatever. But like, even if you look at the Star Wars films, you compare something like the puppet version of Yoda to the digital version of Yoda, and the digital version of Yoda is just so boring. It's not interesting, and it's just like,
I watched I was watching on my phone with the sound turned off last night, the bit of Jaws when they're having that final confrontation with the shark, because I hadn't seen it yet, but I knew the trouble they had with the fake shark and to get it just looking right, and the like putting one frame too many ruined the effect. But I thought it was very effective, even though we know that in real life it was a very unconvincing model.
Yeah, exactly. All the work and all the puppeteering and all of the practical effects. I think that's why it's amazing to watch these films from even the pre-code films and stuff, when they just started getting into talkies, just the fact that they were merging, sound and audio and visual together like that. I mean, it's really, these people now are really nothing in comparison to the sort of technology that they were having to deal with and how hard it was to manually put everything together. So just, even the way that they, Fred and the discussions he had about how his dances were to be shot and the types of filming that needed to be done so everything could be continuous. Yeah.
Well, they put themselves through such the ringer to make those dance numbers, because partly because of the requirements of the dance, partly because of the requirements of the cinema, they had to keep doing multiple takes, and they'd had to keep changing their clothes so much because they were getting constantly really sweating in them. And like you were saying, Fred Astaire was very prolific, but we're not talking about just Hollywood acting here. We're talking about someone who's doing like Olympic level athletic performance, and you only have so much time to do that to the fullest. And so he was probably trying to get in everything he could. He did a great job about a decade, no more than that, almost 20 years later in Funny Face, and he could still move his ground then. But
I'm sure you've seen that with him at the Academy Awards when he was like in his early 70s, and was it Bob Hope that made him, quote unquote, made him do a dance routine. He was still flying around the stage at, he was pretty winded, and he was using that as a bit of a joke as to why I couldn't read the names of the nominees out properly. But he still could move, and it just goes to show you, really, if you can keep yourself in shape and keep, conditioned, you really can keep going for a long time. So
the trouble isn't doing the performance; it's the day after.
Yes, yeah, I think that's what he was alluding to, because like, I can't even breathe here. But he still looked, and he really was someone that didn't look that much difference. He only looked like an older version of his younger version, whereas you look at some other actors and it's like, I mean, I was Matt knows that I watch a lot of like soap opera type things. I was watching Alec Baldwin and something in 1985, and then literally I turned it off. You know, he was very slim, and an ad came on with this insurance ad that he does here. I was like, is that even the same person? Like, my God, it's just, wow, how different he looks. But, you know, there's there's something about keeping yourself in condition. So I think friends definitely taught us about that. So thanks to Matt for another fun discussion about two great films. So for next week, so the next cycles one, we have a Gary Cooper double. We actually just decided this right before the show started. So we're doing High Noon, one of his very famous 1950s pictures, and that's with very young Grace Kelly, a very famous film. And then another film, as I was joking to Matt, I've been wanting to see for about 30 years, with one of the loves of my life in it, Anthony Perkins, and that's So Friendly Persuasion. So one's sort of a Western, and the other one's is like a sort of Civil War era drama about a family of Quakers. So I think they'll both be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing both of them.
Yeah, it'll be great. And High Noon is interesting in that it's almost in real time.
I know of the film. I know of both of the films and had been meaning to watch them for many, many years, especially Friendly Persuasion. But, you know, back when I was getting into all sort of stuff, it was very hard unless you could find them on a video cassette somewhere, or you know, DVDs were only just starting to come out back then, but, you know, or on TV. It's actually hard to just go out and find a movie and watch it. So I'm grateful now that we have a bit more technology at our fingertips, so we can just, you know, find the movies and watch them. So, and so Matt, do you want to just let everyone know again where they can find us?
Yes, as always, you can find our Instagram at When Movies Were Good. That's our Instagram handle. Same with Facebook. We're also on Twitter. And if you want to get notified when our new videos come out, please hit the subscribe channel and tap the bell notification, and you'll get immediate notification in your feed. And we will look forward to sharing our new series with you next time.
Thanks very much, everyone. So in the meantime, I'm Rachel.
I'm Matthew.
And we're watching good movies. Thanks, everyone, and take care.